In this video, I'd like to show you how, in detail, I'd carve a sloping hex. In this case, a G2 hex, so one with two high points. So that's one that would look like this. So I've got a couple of hexes I cut earlier and glued together, and that's been left long enough to dry, so at least overnight. And I've assembled my toolkit as I showed how to in a previous video. So we'll just twist this in, make sure it's fully in. Now it's worth talking about the shape that you want to carve here, because you really have a lot of freedom to carve different shapes. What I always try to do is think about how the slope on the surface that you're cutting is going to transition to the hexes next to it. So you want to think about what other hexes could appear next to this one. So for instance, if this slope were next to a G3 hex like this, or G4 hex, what's that going to do to the slope? And what it really means is that you want to have this transition here, you want to be as flat as possible. Because if it comes up to a peak at this edge, then you're going to end up with an artificial sort of crest line here. And likewise, if it slopes down to this edge, you're going to end up with an artificial valley, I suppose. So the optimum is to have this bit here to be as smooth and flat as possible between the two. And the same across here, and the same across here. So that wherever it connects, it'll be as flat as possible. And then you won't, the better you can do that, the less of a sort of a pillowing effect you'll get on your hexes. Some of my earlier hexes have a bit more of that pillowing effect. I'd like to think of a lot better at that. So with these shapes, when you think of how they're going to appear next to each other, a G2 hex is what I would call an external curve, because it's transitioning from here around to here. So if you were to have a hill shape, this is going to be like a sort of promontory on the hill, whereas the G4 is the opposite. It's kind of an internal curve. And that's the kind of shape you want to maintain. And on G3, it's going to be straight, basically. So you might have a series of G3s going in a line here. So you don't really want anything that's going to be too undulating. It's fine to have a few, you know, it's nice to have a bit of variance. You probably don't want all your hexes, all your G3 hexes to be identical. But what you don't really want is lump, lump, lump going along the line. So yeah, that's what you're aiming for when you cut them. The G4 hex can be a little bit tricky because of that. Because in order to get that flat slope, flat transition here and here, it means that you've got to make a sort of a hollow in the hex, which is a little trickier with the hot wire cutter, but perfectly doable. So I'm going to start with showing you the G2 hex, which in some ways is the easiest one to do. I think it's the most visually pleasing. I think these ones are the best. So as I say, I've set up my toolkit ready to cut one of these. Hot wire cutter ready. I'll just turn it on in a second. Okay, now I've already checked this hex. Unfortunately, this excess here is just not quite thick enough to form a river hex. If it were, I'd want to slice it off first so I can make use of the extra hex, but this is that's about 5 or 6 mil, so not thick enough. So I won't worry about that, that's just waste really. So I'm going to start here, and along the top surface here, I'm just going to be cutting it pretty much horizontal. So you've got to make sure you do not lose your wire in the gaps between these side pieces, because it will have a tendency to get caught in those. So you've really got to be conscious of that, and you may even need to lift the wire over them just a little bit. You can always remove the excess afterwards. So I'm starting on the edge here, which is not what you'd normally do at other times, but I'm making sure that the wire is on the side, is not going to get caught, and drag it across. So keeping it pretty flat, doesn't have to be exact. Okay, so now I've got to the end of there. Now I wouldn't normally stop at this, but just to explain to you. So I've cut across here, and now I want to come down the side. And again, I want to keep it reasonably level, I guess. Level to slightly up towards the other side. It's always better to cut off less initially and pick it up later. So here we go, next side. Okay, reach the next corner. Ready to turn it around. So I'm going to make sure I'm not going to go into the crack again. There we go. So you see all the way around there. I did manage to catch into that crack just a little bit, which is a shame, but you can put a bit of filler in there or sand it down. Shouldn't be too much of a problem. But you see how when I'm resting the hot wire cutter on here, it's only on one side of the jig. Okay, I'm not trying to catch both sides at the same time, because you'll end up with a very artificial sort of shape where you want something more naturally rounded. So come around here and down. Now I've got the other three sides to cut. So I'll do the same thing on the other side. Okay, and to the bottom. Okay, so that's basically the shape cut. Now, you do have some tooling lines on here which you don't want to end up with, but a lot of that will just sand off quite easily. And once it's covered in grass, you're not going to notice it very much. A line like that you probably would pick up. So just have a look at it now and think, how could I improve that, make it look a little bit more rounded. Sometimes you can cut this in one or two goes. Other times it may take you a little bit longer. But these edges here should ensure that you don't go too far off the beaten track, It will at least line up with the ones next to it. So at that point, I think I would be tempted to accept that and then just get some sandpaper to smooth it off. So in one of my other videos, which I shot with my prototype Hex, I showed myself sanding down whilst it's still in the toolkit. And as soon as I had shot that video, I thought actually that really wasn't the smartest idea, because you're going to end up sanding down your edge pieces as well. And you don't want to do that because obviously it's going to wear down your toolkit prematurely. So I'll pop this one out. And I'm just going to pause this video whilst I get some sandpaper. So, this is sandpaper. It's quite an old piece, I probably ought to get some new sandpaper. But you want something quite fine for this, because you're not really looking to remove very much polystyrene, you just want to remove any tooling marks, anything that suggests that's been done with the hot wire cutter. I'd say that's pretty much fine. The only bit I'd be worried about there is that groove where I got the wire caught in the corner. So if you do have anything like that, some ready mixed polyfiller, it's quite handy. haven't used this in a while, so it's a little bit stiff. Let's get it out of there. So you get yourself a palette knife or something and just work it into the crack. So that'll do. And if you're not, any other marks which you're not so happy about, or if you have your bolt holes are showing through here, then not. But if your bolt holes are showing through, then again a bit of polyfill will fill them in quite quickly and easily. So you see, you really don't have to worry too much if you've made a bit of a mistake, as long as the surrounding polystyrene is in the right sort of level. It doesn't matter if you made a small mistake like that. And then I'd say that's pretty good. So let the filler dry, a spackle I think they call it in the States, and then that's ready for painting and flocking. So that's how to carve a hill hex, a G2 hex specifically, using the Hex Terrain Toolkit.